Hi, this is Pragmatic Dave Thomas. You're listening to the, oh my God, I've just done, help me out here. Agile what? Uprising.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am this episode's host, Hrcsko. Joining me is fresh back from his international trip to parts unknown, James Gifford. Gifford, how are you?
What's up, Jay? A little tired, a little jet lag.
This is going to be a fun one.
Well, stomach's still not quite right either, so I'm going to have to run out in the middle of the podcast and crap my brains out.
Fair enough. We can always edit it and post. So the topic of tonight's episode is domain-driven design and how it's applied to Agile transformations. So first off, let's start by, for our listeners, if you're not familiar with domain-driven design is a methodology typically used in architecture for designing complex systems. And there are a couple of key concepts that are used along with the definition of domain in order to visualize how these systems work. So let's start off, Gifford. Do you have experience using this sort of stuff either in your current life or your past lives? Have you come across this idea before?
Well, if I remember domain-driven design, I think you and I were at a large financial institution that hired a company that, rhymes with, BotWorks, and they were, they were helping us build a loan platform using domain-driven design, which really meant they broke the system up into a whole bunch of different pieces and then connected it together with duct tape and bubble gum, and took a lot of time to really deliver things.
Right, and that's
the idea of being able to break up and compartmentalize systems so that they're independently updatable and connected by common messaging. It's a great idea, but really, it takes a lot of, I think it took them a lot of effort to figure out how to make it all work.
Right, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. How it's almost needlessly complex. It's like the equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot because you're creating so many little pieces tied together that it can create way more problems longer term when it comes to maintenance and upkeep. So let's back it up and start with the basics, right? So there is a book. I forget the gentleman's name. I want to say it's what's his name? The guy who wrote the book on domain-driven design, Eric Evans. And there's a simpler book, which all of you can download. I'll post a link in the show notes on InfoQ, titled Domain-Driven Design Quickly. And what it does is it distills the book down. And the first thing that starts up with is a definition of a domain. So the definition of domain, if I'm plagiarizing from either this book or Wikipedia or wherever I saw it, is a sphere of knowledge, influence, or activity. The subject area to which the user applies a program is the domain of the software. So, Gifford, in your example, we were building a loan platform, right? So this was the domain. And then below that, keep me honest, we had the idea of subdomains, right?
Yeah. So there was like an account one. There was a bunch of them. There was like a user profile, basically the customer profile, the various accounts, payments.
So almost like features,
bunch of them. There were like 10 of them.
They're almost like
sort of
software features or business capabilities is probably the better term. And all these domains all tied together into a master domain, which we then built a whole shit ton of software for. So let's talk, James, let's start talking with concepts. So there's a couple of key concepts that I took away when I read this book, and I've actually been able to apply them not only to my current role, but the transformations I've done since. So the first one I came across, which I think is really important, is bounded context. And when to our listeners, when you think about bounded context, think about the setting in where something, the definition of context is the setting where something appears and determines its meaning. In terms of what we're doing, think about not something as rigid as an old euphemism, the Chinese wall, but it's where parts start and stop. So if you look at a And James, I'm going to just use a large enterprise company as an example. The business they're in really is of no importance. So in that domain, you have multiple different domains. Like you said, there's customer support, there's account setup, there's billing, there's payments, there's finance, there's HR. Each one of these is a domain, right? The concept of bounded context comes in is you need to know where each piece starts and ends. So this becomes really important when you're even trying to plan out something like applying a domain to a value stream, right, or a business capability. You need to know where one starts and ends. And with that becomes helpful with identifying constraints, and it becomes helpful with identifying dependencies. So when you're crossing from one context to another, you need to make sure that there's a clear demarcation there so you understand where the pieces end, so you can understand how they fit together better. Now, based upon your experience, James, where does some of this bounded context stuff come into play, even in your current life, like one of the transformations you're working on now? Have you run into things where people don't know where I stop and you start, or where my responsibility ends? And have you seen it run into problems?
Well, yeah, to some degree, I mean, I've seen, various groups, depending on the functional silos within the organization, if, suppose you have a requirements engineering group, and you got a QA group, and you got a software development group, and you're really trying to get those guys together, and all of them play a specific role within the organization, and all the specific job functions that they kind of do. It's interesting when those people all start going, well, I like what these guys are doing over here, and I'm going to meddle with that because I think I can do it better. And they end up meddling with when you get the guys, the requirements engineering, where some of the product owners come from. Like, well, we know about this Agile stuff better than the Agile coaching group, so we're going to muddle around and try to make that. We're going to get in there and mess with that because we know better. Instead of us all working together in harmony.
And you just brought up an interesting topic by using the word, or you brought up an interesting point, I should say, by using the word handoffs, right? So would you agree that that's a sure sign that you're making things a little bit too complex if you have too many handoffs, too many subdomains inside of a domain? Is that like a good warning sign that maybe we need to simplify this?
Oh, you mean when I've got 36 teams to deliver on one set of capabilities, for one set of capabilities for a particular product group doing their own thing and waiting for the next group to do and basically overrunning your project budget? I've never seen that at all, Jay.
but I mean, you bring up a valid point, right? So here's another Agile principle writ large when we talk about cross-functional teams, right? So when you have an outside or oversized amount of handoffs, or an oversized amount of subdomains that you're trying to make workflow in between, that's a good sign that you're suboptimal in your setup, in your organization structure. And you probably should look at maybe getting to more cross-functional idea. And while there will still be bounded context, it'll be less rigid and easier to step across those pieces.
I mean, I think that the picture you're really trying to paint there is when you're trying to run an Agile organization when you're still just stuck with component teams.
Yep. Yeah, that's basically where I'm trying to get to, right? It's
but you can go Agile if you read the book Scrum from the Trenches by Heinrich Nyberg in a weekend.
Oh yeah, which when it was emailed to all the employees, it bogged the Outlook server because it was a 16 meg attachment. Yeah, we're not. It was a lot of therapy to unwind that, man. I don't want to go back down that path. Next key concept here I want to talk about is I think it's everybody, and this is important even if you're doing waterfall, right? Ubiquitous nomenclature. So the idea that when we say ubiquitous nomenclature, we really mean a language, right, that's structured around the model, and everybody uses it. And I think this is important. So I'll share with you, James, an anecdote. Back in my waterfall days when I was a BA and project manager, I was working on a project. We were doing some tweaks to the marketing engine. And I had 2 marketing guys in the room. I had 2 data science guys in the room. I had a couple of UI developers and a couple of ETL guys. And we literally spent, I think it was a month and a half, an hour or 2 hours twice a week trying to get the requirements out. And we came to realize in week 6 that the fundamental stumbling block that we were having was 3 different people in the room were using the term project to mean 3 different things. The data science guys, they were using the term project to think about one of their data analysis packages. The PMO types like myself were using project to think of the whole initiative. The marketing guys think of project as almost like a marketing campaign, but they bleed and overlap with each other. It was nuts. And when we finally had this light bulb go off, and I'm not going to give myself credit, there was definitely somebody in the room who said, you realize we're all using the same word to mean 3 different things. And then that took a whole nother set of meetings to iron out what the right words were. But once we reached that point, it made life easier because we all understood we were saying the same thing. So in my personal opinion, James, and you let me know what you think. When I think of transformations, right, when doing the Agile, right, we need to all agree on what is a value stream, what is a business capability, what is a product owner, what do they actually own, what is a program. All these sort of things are very, very important. We have an episode coming up where we're going to talk about the definition of flow and the flow manifesto that I saw a coworker come across. So coworker author, I should say. I think these things are important because if everybody's speaking different languages, it's almost like you're building a Tower of Babel inside IT. What do you think?
I mean, I have to agree with you. I mean, that was the whole point of orchestration in a lot of these systems, and you see it in design, domain-driven design, is that, if you look at it like an event bus or any other system where they're using orchestration, you're basically having one system talk to another system, and it doesn't care what the other one system's saying. By the time it gets to the next system that needs to use it, it's transformed into something that's readable by the users at the other end of the other client. We use these kind of techniques. So everybody's familiar with safe PI planning. Well, we use a version. We basically took that practice, we've adopted it, but we don't. It's our PI. We don't plan for 10 weeks. We don't do 2 weeks of innovation planning, but we use that concept of getting everybody into a room. We only do it for 5 days. So instead of us calling it PI planning, we have every practice that we bring in from the outside, from another framework that we modify to fit the context of our company, we rename it so that we are talking all the same language. Because as you bring people into the organization, they hear that you're doing PI planning and it looks nothing like that, then they're like, well, this isn't what we used to do, or this isn't how I used to do it. So to eliminate all that confusion, we've renamed anything in the industry that we've brought in and made our own so that we are speaking that common language.
So you say when you bring it in and you make it your own. So if you're bringing something in wholesale without any change, do you keep the industry standard name or do you change it to something else?
No, we keep it wholesale. I mean, if it's wholesale brought in, pick it up off the shelf and use it like a hammer, it's still called a hammer.
That's interesting because when I talked to Ivor about
crescent wrench, I'm going to call. You broke up there, buddy.
Oh yeah, we're both clipping a little bit. When I talked to Ivor, he was talking about the methods prison and sitting behind a guru and creating all these unique terms. But I never thought about it. I never thought about it in that way, the way you just described, where I am a new person walking into an organization and I hear PI planning. I automatically assume it's 3 days, it's co-located. You have the giant arts and crafts board with all the red yarn. So I think there's something to be said there about renaming it and making it your own, especially if you've changed it.
Yeah, it helps keep the context. It now creates a new context around practices because the spirit of it's there, but it's, you know, it's changed.
So there's another practice here, James, where I want to ask you if you're using it or seeing another concept, and there's the concept of a context map, right? So it almost combines that bounded context and the domain itself into like a visual cue. So you build out this, I've seen it done like almost like a thought bubble map, mind mapping. But have you had a lot of experiences where you actually draw out the context itself to see not only where it's tied together, but where it overlaps?
So I mean, so right now, I mean, we're doing our lean agile journey in various products. So we basically go into a set of products, we transform all the teams within that product. Every product's its own self-contained thing, but there are four consistent things that live within that product. There's product and program manager, or there's program management, there's functional management, there's the teams. And when I loosely say teams, I'm talking about the context of the product owner, scrum master, and the development team. So as a scrum team, we use agile teams because we use the same construct around that for Kanban as well. And then we have our product management group. So we have this four way construct. So as we address the journey, every single one of those basically role families have their own journey on our agile journey. They all at some point in time come together and converge at various points where the knowledge that we need to teach them and they need to grow towards. So like that when we reference that, you know, I just mentioned that idea of the modified PI planning that we've run. We don't even introduce that to the teams for a long time. We get them just doing regular releases and planning a release basically using Scrum foundations and a little bit of story mapping. And so everybody's learning that knowledge. They can go off in their own knowledge tracks and learn. But after they get those skills down, then we would bring them to, we ultimately, all of those different domains or paths that they're following converge to basically then evolve into a shared set of practices. And if our whole entire journey map, there's probably 8 or 4 places where everybody intersects and we touch the full set. But everybody else, I mean, throughout that though, they have their own individual knowledge sets that they're learning and able to kind of mature and grow on.
So you just said something, James. I want to pull on that string. So you said each particular group has their own journey map, right? So there's the overarching journey and what you're trying to accomplish, but you actually do go through the steps for, say, certain business capabilities or functions or value streams, whatever. Each one of them has their own, what amounts to, I don't want to say the dirty word maturity model, but they have their own plans in place about how they're going to get from A to B vis-a-vis maturity.
Essentially, so we talk about teaching teams to iteratively develop software. So what we're doing is using a maturity model essentially to help teams incrementally grow. So we have our journey starts out with a gathering. So basically, it's a product onboarding. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we do, training, and then each track goes out onto the journey. And so the teams, we're really focusing on building some level of proficiency around, the Scrum framework. So we might look at, we go from starting to modeling. So we don't use numbers. We go starting. What does it go? It's starting, learning, understanding, modeling, and then embodying is the fifth of it. So by the time you're at stage 5, you're super knowledgeable. So we set learning paths and learning checkpoints. And basically, so for this stop, we're really trying to get teams to about this level of maturity before they can move on to the next stop. And then at that next stop, we would, basically continue to improve their Scrum skills, but now we're going to introduce the ideas of work in progress limits. So they're starting to get the feeling of going through that rhythm of Scrum. They're going to fail a little bit. They're not going to make sprint commitments, different things, but they're going to be mature enough that, all right, we can now start getting them to think about WIP limits. And so the next time they're building skills around improving Scrum while introducing some WIP limits and getting some basic skills around that. Once they master those, they go on to the next spot. And you're iteratively, continuously building up sets of skills while introducing new practices that ultimately let them deliver more efficiently, because we're running a Scrum Plus model. So we basically run pretty much pure Scrum with lean practices added. And as they evolve, if you're in the Agile team, basically track once you've evolved past the basic like Scrum and lean principles merge together, then we start really getting into some kind of technical practices and things like that. So your learning journey is iteratively introduced, so you're not overwhelming people and teams, but you're also able to track progress. So now the entire organization can see how that team or within that product is actually progressing on their journey.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. So we've walked away a bit from context mapping, but you introduced the interesting idea of creating it's almost like a plan and then a sub-plan below it. It's you have a master goal and transformation journey for the enterprise, but then for each individual piece of it, they're all on their own separate ways. And I know we're eventually going to have a show coming up on Agile maturity models, which I know is a hot button topic lately. So I don't want to get too far into that, but that's an interesting way to look at it. Never thought about it that way.
But I mean, if you want to talk about a context map, let's look at something like how many. So we used to do. I went to a customer. We did a large e-commerce platform. We did a story map of just here is the ordering workflow. Within the ordering part of the system, there were 18 nonlinear ways to actually get into the ordering basically flow. So whether you were in inventory, you were in some reference data screens, you were doing some just straight up coming into the shopping cart and shopping. So we took that story map and we turned that into a user journey map. So it basically created all of the different contexts. So I'm a user coming into the ordering experience from the inventory module while I'm doing this activity. So you're basically looking at that context map of, I need to be able to have a consistent experience from going from this one part of a system into the next part of the system. And this data should be kind of riding along with me as part of that experience.
So let me ask you this, James. When you did that analysis and you realized that there are umpteen different ways to enter into this process, after you realized that, was a decision made to cut some of those back to make the experience more uniform? Like, how did you handle that?
So we ultimately went and we invited a user experience group in. We ran some customer simulations, and what we agreed on was ways of working within the product. So basically we identified if you were displaying data, it needed to be in a grid, and it was this type of, like, if I'm going to do editable versus read only versus sort filter, we basically created reusable content, like basically reusable JavaScript. I think they were actually using Angular or React, I can't remember, but we made reusable components. So literally every single page that they had to deal with, they understood what the work context of that screen was, and then we just used elements from the library. And then every 6 weeks, we'd have customers come in and play with it, because we weren't releasing it for a full year. So it was basically a big bang release, but every 6 weeks we had customers come in and play with it and validate the work experience. And so the user experience was bound by you would say we ubiquitized the UI elements by creating this specific ways of working within the product. So every developer just had to know, hey, what's the context of the customer doing in this page? And then I can go to the library, Bob, plop them on the page, find an object, Bob's your uncle, the thing was off to the races. So it helped accelerate the development of the application too, because we weren't having to rebuild content or rebuild pages from scratch every single time. Literally
Right.
So you had a complete team running through the whole thing.
And I'm assuming it also made maintenance going forward easier because the code was by extension cleaner, less onerous. You knew that when you made a call to look up payment history, it was coming from the same piece no matter where in the app you did it, where in the system you did it, you were hitting basically the same service call.
Yeah, same service call, same UI. So in reality, when we looked at customer support and service screens, the customer support was literally looking at the experience that the customer had on the screen, and then on 3/4 of the pane, on the other quarter of the screen was more the technical mumbo jumbo-y, like data-y customer service kind of thing. But they could literally see what the customer saw in the support side of the application. So if you're on the phone trying to trouble something with the user, you're looking at their cart. And then you could see some more of the data, like some of the more detailed like data kind of things. So it made the experience extremely well for the people trying to support this too.
Oh, fascinating. So you've actually presented the perfect segue for the next concept I wanted to talk about, which is the context of aggregates or aggregate roots. So in pure semantic terms, an aggregate root is a collection of objects bound together by a root entity, right? So everything is tied together to the same root. So that means to your example, right? Everybody's hitting the same UI piece for the service. Everyone's hitting the same shared resource, and in this way it's less confusion, it's less things get screwy and get out of control. Another way I look at it is specifically when it comes to aggregate roots regarding a transformation, it comes down to vision, it comes down to the why, not technical, but this is also an aggregate root. What are we trying to accomplish in terms of this Agile transformation? What does the end state mean to us? That, if you think about it, is the aggregate root that all the other subroots spill out of, because so if our goal is to put a man on Mars and return him safely in the next 10 years, every single sub-department, every single subdomain can look at that and say, okay, this is my goal, this is my route, this is where we're all boiling down into, this is what I need to get to. Does that make any sense at all, or did I just go a little bit down the nerd rabbit hole?
You've gone full on nerd. But so I'm trying to, let's see if the internet's going to cooperate here for me. But I mean, I think that you're right. And so David Marquet talks about to create empowerment, to create different, like basically that autonomy, be able to decentralize decision making. Teams need the clarity and the technical competency to kind of be able to deliver that. And so leaders are critical to whether you're a product person creating the clarity around the what the product's doing, how this particular product fits into the company mission, all of these various areas and opportunity for clarity. I mean, if none of that all doesn't roll back up to what the company's mission is, then you kind of you're creating that self-defeating prophecy. And there's a quote that I'm trying to kind of find, because it's something that we kind of see and we wrestle with kind of regularly. And if I can find it within the next 2 seconds, I will tell you what it is. But so here it is. So this comes from the book Hit Refresh by Satya Nadali. When we are an inch apart on the strategy at the leadership level, our product teams end up miles apart in execution.
That's brilliant and spot on.
So, I mean, so organizations create clarity. Like it's kind of ironic whenever, I've worked at some companies where if, we were going around the room and talking to leaders within a room, and when the organizational dev guy was up there doing his song and dance and the pageantry of the greatest showman, essentially, because that's their training style. They brought up, what is our company mission? And I'm in a room of 30 leaders, and 2 of them could tell you what the company mission was.
Oof.
How are the people in the trenches delivering on what the company mission is? How do they know why I show up every day to work? If I had to tell a friend, why is this company so awesome to work for, you should come, if you don't understand what your company's mission is.
Yeah, that's a bit terrifying. What was the end result of that? Like when everybody realized that there wasn't a universal understanding. What was the outcome?
I mean, the outcome, there has been repeated kind of tries to kind of get people aligned around this mission. And I can tell you they never totally got it right. There never was that clarity, whether people didn't care, people didn't put it front and center. Like it takes a lot of effort to remain aligned and not get lost. And some people don't, some of these messages don't wrestle or resonate with people. And, it's kind of, they let themselves get confused. Some of that, I posted something in one of our Slack channel, I think it was, about forced confusion. They don't like what they're hearing. They'll inevitably make themselves confused to avoid the topic at hand.
Which is that's a whole nother can of worms for a whole nother podcast. James, I think we've quickly hit the 30-minute mark, and I think I've covered off just about everything I wanted to touch on. So any final thoughts on this before we wrap it up?
I think that there are a lot of valuable ways to look at domain-driven design. If you're looking at a holistic transformation and you're looking at all the subcomponents of an enterprise, from HR to the business, I'm thinking that there is, we talk about, rest in peace, Mike Beadle. When we talked about, when we interviewed him for the manifesto stuff, the signer stuff, he was talking about business agility and talking about, making that leap from, the traditional Scrum Guide Scrum to a version of Scrum that was ubiquitized. He basically took all of the concepts of Scrum when he was doing, oh crap, what was it? Is it Enterprise Scrum?
Yeah, it was Enterprise Scrum.
So when you look at Enterprise Scrum, Mike went through and they kind of very carefully ubiquitized Scrum so that it didn't matter whether you were in development, the business, HR, executives, you could figure out how to apply that in your day-to-day lives. So, or within the context of working in the company. So as we go to look at all these different domains within our company, as coaches, as leaders, are we looking at making this as simple as possible for the adoption of others? Or, are we trying to kind of come in and use all kind of rigid terms and different things that aren't going to resonate with different people? So that's, it kind of goes back to some of the earlier opening stuff around, we took PI planning and we made it our own, and we renamed it because everybody else coming in is going to have that, different context, just like your story about, everybody thinking a project's different. It is these concepts are powerful if applied in the right context. You could turn this idea, these notions, into something really powerful and probably a semi-decent way to get to business agility. But you're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to, but I think there is something there around, giving people context. And that was something that was awesome that Mike did, was he gave people the context without necessarily talking about the software aspects of it.
Right.
He created that map. So, I think that this is something I'm going to probably keep thinking about a little bit more as I kind of mess around with things, because I think, while we're focusing on product teams right now, eventually our company's goal is to get to business agility. And so how do we integrate finance? How do we integrate, legal? How do you integrate HR? You're gonna have to move past the development, because we use pure on Scrum team, traditional software kind of terminology. So, as we look to expand that and bring these concepts in, maybe these different domains, because they are very, very cut and dry domains in an organization, how do you bring them in so that you have a unified language across the company?
And I don't want to go too far into it because I think we're going to have an episode about it. But if anybody out there has read Project to Product by Dr. Mick Kirsten, he talks about the idea of work items being universally defined. And he actually, I think it breaks it down into 4 categories. There's features, there's risks, there's defects, and there's debt. And his argument is, if not everyone has the same concept of the work being done and then the weight applied, the importance of each, it's really easy for, like you said, if you're an inch off at the leadership level, you're a mile off at the team level, it's really easy to lose sight of why do we need to stop this iteration and concentrate more on tech debt and risk when we should be doing new features. It's a whole different discussion for another episode. So James, I'm going to wrap us up. First of all, thank you for your time with all your jet lag. And your wonky GI tract. I appreciate taking the time to sit with us. On behalf of James and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning in once again. If you like what you heard, please give us a review, a rating on iTunes, Stitcher, your podcast app of choice. I believe even Spotify. It does help others find us. There should be a thread about this on the coalition.agileuprising.com. So feel free, hop in, join the discussion. If you've used domain-driven design, never heard of it before, are you going to try and use it now? Jump in on the conversation. We're always looking for dialogue. Also, to remind our listeners, we do have a Discord server, which is discord.com/agileuprising. There's been some lively discussion there as of late. And lastly, but not leastly, we are all fully committed to keeping Agile Uprising free. However, if you would like to contribute to offset hosting costs, server costs, all the incidentals, we do have a Patreon as well, so you can look us up there as well. So once again, James, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our listeners. And until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast, signing out.